Hello everybody, Raven Knight here, and welcome back to our Bible study series going through the life of David. If you guys have a Bible, and I hope you do, please go ahead and open up to 1 Samuel chapter 25. This is going to be our last day in David before he becomes king, so you can kind of look at this as a halfway point. We are almost into David becoming king, but before he gets to be king, there's one more story I want to talk to you guys about while David was kind of living out in the wilderness, and this I think is a very important story. It gets kind of overlooked a lot when talking about David, but I do think it's an important one. We're going to be talking about David, Nabel, and Abigail, and this is going to be very fun. For those of you who are brand new to this series or brand new to what we're doing, nice to meet you and glad you're here. My name is Raven. I am a Christian and a content creator for Honor and a lot of other things, and in this series we're essentially walking through the life of David, going through his life in the Bible and talking about why we can learn a lot from David, because David teaches us something very important. When we go through our life as Christians, we often say to ourselves, how can I be a true believer in God? How can I be a follower of God when I am so flawed and messed up and when I make so many mistakes? I have made so many mistakes in my life. How could God possibly have a relationship with me? Well, David is called a man after God's own heart, but he is incredibly flawed, more so than many of us are. But we find as we read through David's life that we can relate a lot to what he goes through. So I'm very excited to jump into this. Let's not waste any more time. Let's get into 1 Samuel chapter 25. I want to ask you guys a question before we get started though. What do you guys think is the cost of power? Like, many of you have probably had an opportunity in your life where you have had power, be it a position that you earned, be it you've come into some money, be it you've gotten a promotion, you've gotten power or position or privilege of some variety. What do you do with that power, position, or privilege? What do you do with it? How do you handle it? Today we're going to be looking at three people, David, of course, Nabel, and Abigail, and we're going to see how these three people who all had power handled their power. Okay, so let's get started. Let's go ahead and set the stage in verse 1. Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him at his home in Ramah. Just to basically give you an idea of what this is looking like, Samuel was the prophet of the time period. He was a very well-known, well-respected, and beloved man. He was the man who anointed Saul and David. People loved Samuel, okay? In fact, he was the one that the people of Israel went to before they even had a king, because Samuel had a direct line to God. He talked to God. So Samuel's death was a big blow to a lot of people. Moving on. Then David moved down into the desert of Paran. A certain man in Maon, who had property there at Carmel, was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. His name was Nabel, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman, but her husband was surly and mean in his dealings. He was a Calebite. Okay, so we've set the stage of our three characters. We know who David is, but now we've been introduced to a guy named Nabel. Nabel is incredibly wealthy. He has thousands of goats and thousands of sheep, which means that he can use a lot of them for making money. It is shearing time. He's shearing them to become very wealthy. He's not Israelite. He's a Calebite. And his wife, Abigail, is very beautiful, very intelligent, but he himself is kind of a jerk. So we now know who we're dealing with. All right, so moving on to verse 4. While David was in the wilderness, he heard that Nabel was shearing sheep. So he sent 10 young men and said to them, "Go up to Nabel at Carmel and greet him in my name. Say to him, long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours. Now I hear that it is sheep shearing time. When your shepherds were with us, we did not mistreat them, and the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. Ask your own servants, and they will tell you. Therefore be favorable towards my men, since we come at a festive time. Please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them." Okay, so right here, here's the setup. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, why is David doing this? Why is David expecting a handout from Nabel? Isn't that a little bit presumptuous? Well, you got to understand the customs at the time period. This is a festive time period. The time of the shearing of the sheep is a festive period, and it's supposed to be a time of generosity. So David is essentially saying, hey, I've been your next door neighbor for a while, man. I've been living here for a while. And any time that there were problems, we took care of it. We've protected your shepherds. We've protected your flocks. We've never stolen anything from you. We've never done anything bad to you. In fact, we've made sure bad things don't happen to you. And we would really appreciate it if you could just give us something. Like, if you could just give us a little something. You're obviously wealthy. You have plenty to go around. We would really appreciate it if you could just give us a little help, just a little bit of help. And in verse 9, when David's men arrived, they gave Nabel this message in David's name. Then they waited. Now, the first thing that I want to talk about here is I want to talk about what power, when misunderstood or misused, will cause us to do. And we're going to see it from Nabel and David. We'll start with Nabel. The first thing, and if you take notes during my streams, and I hope you do, because there's a lot here that I want to talk about, but the first thing I would say is power can cause us to look down on good deeds and look to our own losses. It can cause us to look down on good deeds and look to our own losses. One of the things that we're afraid of when it comes to power is losing it or showing weakness. Quite often we feel like if we have power or we have position, we're afraid that we'll end up sacrificing it by doing a good deed. We'll look weaker for doing it. And we see that with Nabel in verse 10. Nabel answered David's servants, "Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take my bread and water and the meat I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where?" So we have very clearly Nabel is just essentially saying, I don't know who you are. I don't care who you are. Why should I give up what I've worked hard for, what I've made for, and give it to you guys? Why should I do this? Get out of here. Now, here's the thing. This is rude. Absolutely. This was a bad thing to do. No question. And we can all agree that Nabel's kind of a jerk. I think we can all agree on that. But David's about to make a mistake too. The second thing that power causes us to do, it causes us to seek immediate gain or justice. Those who have power and are used to getting what they want quite often seek immediate gratification. And I think we can all agree with that. Verse 12, David's men turned around and went back. When they arrived, they reported every word. David said to his men, "Each of you strap on your sword." So they did, and David strapped on his as well. About 400 men went up with David, while 200 stayed with the supplies. Guys, David's ready to kill. Why? Because Nabel wouldn't give him what he asked for. Now, you might be thinking, that seems a bit excessive. It is. Because David, while a good man, has a little bit of a pride issue. He went up to Nabel, asked him to be generous, said, "Hey man, would really appreciate it if you were generous right now. It is a festive time period, and we've been really good to you. We'd really appreciate a little bit of a handout." Nabel said no, and he was wrong to say no, don't get me wrong, but does he deserve to be killed for it? Maybe not. At least not by David's own hand. We talked last time about what revenge does, why it's good to resist revenge. David's literally about to walk right into that trap. The third thing that it causes us to do, we're going to skip ahead just a little bit. We're going to go to verse 20. The third thing that power causes us to do, it makes us lose sight of God's intentions and make our will seem like His will. It blinds us to believe that our will, our desires, are God's will and God's desires. Now, many of you may not have done this, but some of you may recognize this when I tell you this. How many of you guys have thought to yourself, you know what? God has set me up in this situation. He must clearly want me to do this. I'm sure David thought that when Saul had his back to him in that cave that we talked about last time. He probably thought, man, God just handed Saul to me on a silver platter. He must want me to kill Saul. He must want this. And so we turn our personal desires into what we believe God wants us to do. And that's what David does here in verse 20. As they came it says here, as she came riding her donkey in the mountain ravine, there was David and his men descending towards her being Abigail, and she met them. David had just said, "It's been useless. All my watching over this fellow's property in the wilderness so that nothing of his was missing. He has paid me back evil for good. May God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him." I want you to take a moment and look at that verse right there. Look at that verse. Verse 22. May God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave one male of all who belong to him. David is straight up saying, may God punish me if I don't punish this man. That is the equivalent of saying, I swear to God, I'm going to kill every one of these, every male in his household, or God damn me. Can you believe that? This is a man after God's own heart, and he spoke that way? Yes, he did. But it is not justified, because David has let his pride get the better of him. He has just become as bad as Nabel in his own right, because he believes that because he was slighted, because he wasn't given what he wanted, now, because of that, God should judge him if he doesn't get the revenge that he wants. If David doesn't get his own justice, may God punish him for it. Does that sound like someone looking to God first or to himself first? Genuine question. Because I believe that quite often we feel the same way. We feel like, man, God strike me down if I don't get what I want right now. And that's what I mean when I say we start turning our will into God's will, not the other way around. We should look to God's will and make it our will, not make our will God's will. That's not how it works. Here we have seen three prime examples of what power can cause us to do. We see it through Nabel, who is a mean, ungenerous, self-serving jerk, no question. But we also see David, on 2 occasions, show what power caused him to do. What about what power can let us do for good? That's where we get to Abigail. Still taking notes? Make a new section called What Abigail Did, because we're going to talk about what she did with her power. Because Abigail had power. She was the wife of Nabel. She was partially head of the household. So she took action. The first thing Abigail did, she recognized evil when she saw it. A person like Abigail is smart enough to recognize when there's clearly something bad going on. And we are taught to do that. Recognize what is evil. Recognize what is wrong. And Abigail did. If you look at verse 14, after David's men left to go let David know what was going on, one of the servants, verse 14, one of the servants told Abigail, Nabal's wife, David sent messengers from the wilderness to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at them. Yet these men were very good to us. They did not mistreat us, and the whole time we were out in the fields near them, nothing was missing. Night and day, they were a wall around us, that the whole time we were herding our sheep near them. Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man, no one can talk to him. Abigail acted quickly. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 seahs of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on donkeys. Then she told her servants, go on ahead, I'll follow you. But she did not tell her husband, Nabel. So Abigail saw the situation. She recognized what was going on. She said, Nabel definitely did wrong, but I'm willing to bet money David isn't going to take that lying down. So let's immediately take action. Let's immediately get on top of this. We're going to set up something nice for David, and we're going to take it out to him, because David, he did do good for us. He does deserve a little something. We can definitely give him a little something. That's not a problem. We definitely don't want to piss this guy off, because she also knows that David is the kind of guy who could probably bring disaster on her household. She recognized the writing on the wall. She was able to recognize when evil was done and know how to respond to it. That's the first thing. The second thing she did, she humbled herself. Abigail humbled herself. Let's read verse 23. When Abigail saw David coming, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, pardon your servant, my lord, and let me speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. Please pay no attention, my lord, for that wicked man Nabel. He is just like his name. His name means fool, and folly goes with him. And as for me, your servant, I did not see the men my lord sent. And now my lord has surely... And now, my lord, as surely as the Lord your God lives, and as you live, since the Lord has kept you, my lord, as surely as the Lord your God lives... has kept you, my lord, as surely... I am sorry, I'm getting stumbled over my words here. And now, my lord, as surely as the Lord your God lives, and as you live, since the Lord has kept you from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, may your enemies and all you are intent are harming my lord will be Nabel, and let his gift which your servant has brought to my lord be given to the men who follow you. Sorry about that. I was misreading my Bible there for a second. I want to take special note here of what she did. She saw David coming with his armies, ran up. Now, here's the thing. She has power. I want that to be known. She is the wife of Nabel. She is a wealthy, beautiful, powerful woman. And she runs up and she bows to David. Refers to him as my Lord, which is something that she shouldn't have to say. Because technically David is a guest on her land. But she humbles herself. She's not so big as to walk up like a procession and just say, "Excuse me, Sir David, yes, absolutely. Hello, how are you? I'm Nabel's wife, Abigail, yes, bow before me." She's not flaunting her power. She is letting go of it. She is making herself lower than others. And she's straight up saying, "Don't listen to my husband. He's an idiot. He's a wicked, wicked man. I do not like him. Many people don't like him." And you might be thinking to yourself, why would Abigail marry a guy like that? She probably didn't have much choice. She probably got picked out by Nabel and an arranged marriage was set up. We don't know the full details. But point is, despite having power, despite having position, she knew to humble herself. She knew to make herself lower, and that is something Jesus taught us to do. But there's another thing she did, and it's very important. Number 3, the third thing she did. She centered her view on God's will. That's probably the most important thing here. She centered her view on God's will, not her own will, but God's will. In verse 28, "Please forgive your servant's presumption. The Lord your God will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my Lord, because you fight the Lord's battles, and no wrongdoing will be found in you as long as you live. Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my Lord will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies he will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. When the Lord has fulfilled for my Lord every good thing he promised concerning him and has appointed him ruler over Israel, my Lord will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or of having avenged himself. And when the Lord your God has brought my Lord success, remember your servant." I want that made perfectly clear. What Abigail basically laid out is this, and I'm going to translate it in a simple terms. David, don't do what you're about to do, because the Lord your God has set you up to be king of all Israel, because you fight the Lord's battles. You fight for the Lord. The Lord is with you. There's no question about that. But if you do this, you will have blood on your conscience, blood on your hands that does not belong to the Lord. Do not let your good name, do not let your good station be damaged by doing this evil thing. And when you do become king of all Israel, remember me. That's powerful. Abigail did the one thing that neither Nabel or David were doing. She kept her eyes focused on God's will. David probably felt justified. Remember, David's the same guy who just a minute ago was saying, "God damn me forever if I don't kill every man in Nabel's household. God punish me however severely if I don't get my justice." And Abigail says, God's will is for you to be better than this. God's will is for you to be better than this. One of the things we forget when we are given power or station or money or what have you is we forget to look to God. We forget that God has maybe given us this station or given us this power or given us what we have because he has a big plan for us. And when we start taking our own wants and our own desires and our own pride into account, suddenly we start to lose track of what God wants for us. And even worse, we may start to assume that what we want is what God wants. And Abigail was smart enough to say, "My Lord, this is not what God wants for you. I don't claim to be a prophet, but if you do this, is this really what God wants?" And David listened. In verse 32, David said to Abigail, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed by your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands. Otherwise, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, who has kept me from harming you, if you had not come quickly to meet me, not one male belonging to Nabel would have been left alive by daybreak." Then David accepted from her hand what she had brought him and said, "Go home in peace. I have heard your words and granted your request." David listened. And David recognized, "You're right. I'm not going to do this." And he says, "You know what would have happened if you hadn't come here? I would have sinned. I would have gone up there and done awful things. I would have sullied my good name, and I would have sullied the Lord's name by doing this. I would have taken vengeance upon myself." That's crazy. Now, I have no doubt that Nabel was probably the bigger jerk in this situation, I would say. But we'd be very foolish to assume that what David was doing was justified, or that David was doing it with the right heart. As Abigail pointed out, the Lord would not want this for you. The last thing that Abigail did, this is the last thing and then we'll wrap up. She was careful in her timing. If we look at verse 36. When Abigail went to Nabel, he was in the house holding a banquet like that of a king. He was in high spirits and very drunk, so she told him nothing at all until daybreak. Then in the morning, when Nabel was sober, his wife told him all these things, and his heart failed him, and he became like a stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabel, and he died. When David heard, verse 39, when David heard that Nabel was dead, he said, "Praise be to the Lord who has upheld my cause against Nabel for treating me with contempt. He has kept his servant from doing wrong and has brought Nabel's wrongdoing down on his own head." Remember last time we were talking about revenge? We were talking about how vengeance belongs to the Lord. Perfect example. It was not David's responsibility to get vengeance for himself. God was going to do it for him. And David even acknowledged, he kept me from doing the wrong thing. God sent Abigail out here to stop me from doing the wrong thing. And in the end, God got vengeance for me. Now back to what Abigail did. Here's something that I want to point out. Abigail could have gone right back to Nabel and said, "Nabel, you have no idea how close you came to getting axed tonight. Do you know how close you came to being killed by David for what you did?" Nope. She knew better. She said, "Nah, I'm going to wait." Because he probably wasn't in a mood to listen. So she said, "I'm not going to do this right now. Not when he's drunk and in high spirits and could be a very volatile person. I'm going to wait." Then once he woke up and the party was over and he was feeling a bit hungover, she said, "Yeah, this is what I did last night." And then after hearing it, he went, "Oh crap," and then fell into a coma, and then God struck him down. Abigail was a very intelligent woman, and she got hers too. She got rewarded for it. If you go into at the end of verse 39, then David sent word to Abigail asking her to become his wife. His servants went to Carmel and said to Abigail, "David has sent us to you to ask you to become his wife." And verse 41, she bowed down with her face to the ground and said, "I'm your servant, and I am ready to serve you and wash the feet of my Lord's servants." Abigail quickly got on donkey and attended by her 5 female servants, went with David's messengers and became his wife. David had also married Ahinoam of Jezreel, and they both were his wives, but Saul had given his daughter Michal, David's wife, to Paltiel, son of Laish, who was from Galim. And we don't need to worry about anything else after that. Next time we get into David, we'll be talking about him after he became king. But what I really want to get into here is this. One thing that I really want you to take away from this is not that power is a bad thing. Sometimes we are given power to do great things for God. David is a great example of that. He was going to be king, and that was God's plan for him. God doesn't just... People make this misconception that God punishes the powerful. No, not at all. Sometimes we're given power or status or position or money because God wants us to do something with it big and meaningful. And he definitely had a plan for David in this case. And there's definitely a problem here with Nabel, but there was also a problem with David, and we need to be aware that this was a problem. Some of us may be looking at this saying, David was perfectly in the right, or Nabel was perfectly in the right. It does not matter. Nabel here was ungenerous with what he had and an absolute jerk, no question. David was seeking personal justice and trying to claim his own personal justice as the Lord's justice. The only intelligent person looking to God's will in all this was Abigail, because she saw evil and knew to act on it, humbled herself so as not to make herself the center of attention, centered her view on God's will, and was patient with how she approached things. So those are the things I leave you with. Recognize evil when you see it. Recognize wrong when you see it. And act on it. Act to prevent it. Act to stop it. Humble yourself. Do not make life all about you or what you can get out of it. Center yourself on God's will, not your will. And be patient and careful in how you approach others and how you approach those that you may have done well for. Because keep in mind, she could have walked up to Nabel and just said, "I saved your life tonight, hubby." She didn't. She waited until the morning and said, "Here's what happened last night." She was patient and careful with her timing. I've been really enjoying going through this. I hope you guys have as well. This is a very fun series to go through. David is just such a fascinating character, isn't he? And we're learning so much about him and the people around him. Gotta love Abigail. She's a really cool character. You know, in today's modern media, you hear people trying to write strong female characters. Abigail's about as strong as you get right there. So she's pretty awesome. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I really had a great time. Next time, we'll actually be getting into David as he becomes king. It's going to be very, very cool. I hope you guys are excited. And as always, folks, I will see you in my next video. Take care.